On November 25, 2001, at 6:04 p.m., 911 operators in Camden County, Georgia, received a call from a man named Steve Brinson. He reported that his wife, 32-year-old Racheyl Brinson, had fallen out of her tree stand at their hunting club. A tree stand is a platform that hunters sit on in order to shoot down at their prey, deer in this case. His wife Racheyl was face down at the base of a tree, and she wasn't breathing. When paramedics arrived at the remote location in the South Georgia woods, they took over CPR. At 6:44, they reported that they were transporting Racheyl to a baseball field that another team of first responders had established as a landing zone for a Lifeline helicopter. 6 minutes later, they advised dispatchers that they didn't need the helicopter after all. Racheyl Brinson was dead. Rachey's death sent shockwaves through their small community in Kingsland, Georgia. She had lived in the area her whole life, and people knew her to be an outgoing person and an avid outdoorsman. They described her as nimble on her feet and graceful and cat-like. Most people liked her. Most of those people didn't feel the same way about her husband, Steve. According to people who knew him, Steve had 3 problems. First, he was a cheater. Friends and family say that he had more than one long-term affair during their marriage, and that he was cheating on Racheyl at the time of her death. Second, he drank. A lot. And third, Steve had a short fuse. And when his temper was up, Racheyl was the recipient of all that anger. She had placed calls to 911 multiple times, and each time when sheriff's deputies arrived at the house, Steve was already gone. Now, just a few hours before her death, Racheyl had dropped off their toddler at her mother's house and was headed to the hunting club. She confided in 3 people, including her mom, a woman named Pat Smith, that she was going to confront Steve later that day about a divorce. He had been staying at their camping trailer out at the hunting club for the previous 3 days. The two just weren't getting along. Shortly after arriving at the club, Racheyl was seen sighting in her rifle with friends. Steve was there too. They were both drinking beer. And nearing dusk, each member of the group headed out to their stands for the night hunt. Witnesses said they saw Steve and Racheyl leaving together. So when Racheyl turned up dead just a couple hours later, and the person who found her was her drinking, cheating, abusive husband, people were suspicious. And it's been almost 20 years since Racheyl Brinson's death, but people are still wondering, could it have been murder? I want to start off by saying that I'm not accusing anybody of anything here. Everybody is innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. But there are several suspicious things about this story. There are more questions than answers, I'd say. So I guess the point of this video is to go through everything that I can find and interview anybody who will talk to me and see if I can find the truth. Was Racheyl's death a murder? Or was it just a freak accident? Now, as I've researched the case, I've been able to get my hands on a lot of official records. And all the case files I'm referencing in what will be probably a pretty long video series can be found on Racheyl's case page on my website, gavinfish.com. You'll also see photos of Racheyl, photos of the scene of her death, and a detailed timeline of events. I'll leave a link in the description below. Kingsland is a city of about 15,000 residents in Georgia's southeast corner. The entire county, which is called Camden County, only has about 50,000 residents in it. It's very rural, it's heavily wooded, it's sparsely populated, and Racheyl loved it there. From a very early age, Racheyl loved the outdoors, and she also loved to fix things. She was a tinkerer. If she wasn't on horseback, she was on a motorcycle, or in a fast car, or on a three-wheeler. She loved jumping on the trampoline, climbing trees, fishing, operating the family's tractor. She loved working on cars, and she loved hunting. When she was 14 years old, her father tragically died. And as the oldest child, she took it upon herself to have the responsibility of helping to raise her brothers. She worked the family farm and fixed the machinery when it broke down. Racheyl was a self-reliant person and somebody who others could rely on as well. In high school, Racheyl met Steve Brinson. Steve was a couple years older than her, and he tended to get in trouble according to people who knew them. According to Rachel's mom, Pat Smith, Steve would buy her liquor, like buy Racheyl liquor. And it wasn't long before the two were frequently drinking together. When Racheyl was stopped for a DUI at a very young age, her mother had to take action and she committed Racheyl to a rehab center. After about 6 years of dating, Steve and Racheyl decided to get married. Their marriage took place on June 8th, 1991. By the time 1999 came around, Racheyl and Steve had had a rocky marriage. They hadn't had any children yet, and Racheyl was talking with family about wanting to divorce Steve. Thinking that a child would help heal their relationship and not wanting to get any older without having children, Racheyl got pregnant and delivered a baby boy near the end of that year. Not surprisingly, the baby didn't seem to help their marriage. And while Racheyl was content with her son, she thought the world revolved around him. Steve didn't seem to have the same feelings. Family members say that Steve would refer to his son as it rather than him, or rather than calling him by name. As time went on, witnesses say that their marriage was splitting further and further apart, which was exacerbated by the revelation that Steve had been carrying on several long-term affairs during their marriage. As they fought more and more, Steve would lose his temper more and more often. Several calls were made to 911 by Racheyl, and officers would be dispatched, but like I said before, Steve would be gone long before they arrived. I want to stop here for a minute and talk about something sketchy that I found out while I've been looking into this case. Now, in fairness, people told me this little fact outright, but then I decided to do a little digging myself, and here's what I found. The sheriff of Camden County at the time of Rachel's death was a man named Bill Smith. Sheriff Smith was what people down south call a good old boy. He had been sheriff for a long time. His dad was sheriff too. So was his dad's dad. So, this guy wielded a lot of power down there in Camden County. When you do an internet search on him, you'll find articles with headlines like "Sheriff Under Scrutiny Over Drug Money Spending" and "Former Camden County Sheriff Charged with Disorderly Conduct." In the past, he's actually been indicted on charges of false imprisonment, planting drugs on people and then arresting them, and civil rights violations. But this guy was so slippery that he pretty much was able to get out of anything that they threw at him. This guy ran Camden County, and he happened to be Steve Brinson's cousin. So when Steve Brinson would begin to abuse Racheyl and she would call 911, he was able to drive away from the house, usually drunk, and sheriff's deputies wouldn't do a thing about it. In fact, when you look at Steve's DUI records, you start to ask yourself, how was he able to get such lenient punishments for his crimes the few times he actually was arrested? Let me give you an example. In December of 1988, Steve Brinson was arrested for driving under the influence and for a felony called serious injury by vehicle. Basically what happened was he was driving drunk and caused an accident that left the driver of the other car in a month-long coma. And when she did finally came to, she found out that she would be disabled for the rest of her life. Now, if convicted, Georgia's statute requires imprisonment for this crime for 1 to 15 years. When Steve was sentenced, he was sentenced to 180 days in the Claxton Detention Center, plus a $3,500 fine and 5 years probation. But that sentence was reduced to 90 days at the Trutland Boot Camp, plus the fine and probation. So yeah, 90 days for permanently disabling another person, almost killing her. People in Camden County have told me that Steve Brinson could get away with almost anything down there without consequences. Let's get back to November 25th, 2001, which is the day Racheyl died. It was a Sunday, and Steve and Racheyl hadn't been getting along. Steve had said to Pat Smith in the months leading up to this day, quote, "She makes me so mad that I just hate her and I want to hit her." This obviously worried Pat. She called the sheriff's office and asked them to do a wellness check. When deputies arrived at the house, nobody was there. As they got closer and closer to November 25th, Pat began to notice that Racheyl and Steve's toddler began using bad language. He even said, "My daddy is mean. He hit my mommy." And by the 25th, Steve had moved out of the house, and like I said before, had been staying in their camper down at the hunting club. He'd been there for 3 days. At about 10 a.m. on the morning of November 25th, Racheyl dropped their son off at her mom's house. He had wanted to go to big church with Grandma. Pat had heard Racheyl say many times that she was planning to divorce Steve, and that day she said to Pat and a family friend named Marianne Kicklighter that she was going to see Steve and end this. Pat said she had a bad feeling and that she and Marianne asked Racheyl to go with them to church that morning, but Racheyl declined and left. Meanwhile, out at the hunting club, Steve was drinking beer and spending time with friends. One witness stated that he called Racheyl multiple times asking her to come out to the club to go hunting with him. And by 2:30 that afternoon, Racheyl was seen by multiple witnesses drinking beer with Steve at the club. At about 4 p.m., Racheyl and Steve were with some friends sighting in their rifles to get ready for the evening hunt. And as twilight approached, they were seen leaving the group together. I'm going to pause here again because there's something weird happening here. At this point in time, Steve Brinson is a convicted felon. Under Georgia law, he's not allowed to own or fire any firearm of any type. And yet, here he is in Camden County, out at the hunting club, firing his rifle off in front of several people with the intent to go hunting that evening. So it makes you wonder, is this another benefit of being the sheriff's cousin? Anyway, from this point on, I'm going to tell the story the way Steve Brinson told it in his written statement. At about 4:30 p.m., Steve told Racheyl they had better get going if they were going to be able to get a hunt in. So they left to go to their tree stands. When they got to the place where they were going to hunt, Steve says that Racheyl told him that she wanted to hunt in his stand instead of hers. He agreed and went to another stand. Again, this is all according to his statement. Then, at about 5:30 p.m., Steve says he heard a deer blow at him, and a few minutes later, he heard a dog come in and jump the deer. So at about 5:45, Steve climbed down from his stand, and he went to his truck to see about the dog. Then, at about 5:50 p.m., he called out for Racheyl. He said he got no response. So he walked over to the stand where she was, and when he got close to her stand, he shone a light up into the tree, and he couldn't see her anywhere up there. He then shone the light down the tree and found her lying at the base of it, the base of the tree where the stand was mounted. Steve described Racheyl as laying face down on top of her rifle. He said he eased her over and found no signs of life. She didn't have a pulse, she wasn't breathing, and her eyes didn't respond to light. He then said that he ran back to his truck, where he had a phone, and called 911. Next, he said he called out on the CB radio to a friend, Terry Holmes, and asked him to come quickly. According to the 911 call log, Steve Brinson called 911 at 6:04 p.m., so 14 minutes after he first found Racheyl. 911 instructed Steve to begin CPR, which he said he did. Now, Terry Holmes' statement said that it took him about 15 minutes to get from where he was when he received the call on the CB radio to the site where Racheyl lay on the ground. So that would have been no earlier than 6:19 p.m. if Steve called Terry right after he called 911, as he said in his statement. So when he got there, Terry said that he helped Steve roll Racheyl over onto her back, and that was when Steve started CPR. First responders arrived close to the scene at 6:23 p.m., but their ambulance was too big and couldn't make it back into the woods where Racheyl lay. So another man who lived across from the hunting club, named Royce Proctor, drove EMTs back into the woods in his truck. They arrived there at 6:28 p.m. At that time, Racheyl was on her back, and EMTs took over CPR, which they continued until 6:49 p.m. when they called Dr. Martinez, who instructed them to stop life-saving measures. A Lifeline helicopter, which had been dispatched, was called off. Racheyl was dead. There's a lot to unpack here. I have a lot of questions. For example, did Steve Brinson start CPR on Racheyl at 6:04 p.m., like it says in his statement, or did he start it at 6:19 p.m. the way Terry Holmes told the story? Why did Racheyl want to hunt out of Steve's tree stand? And was it even his tree stand that she was found beneath? Those are the questions that I want to get into, and we'll get into those in my next video. But before I go, I want to leave you with this. Witnesses say that later that night, people were gathered at Pat Smith's house, including Steve Brinson. Word had gotten out throughout town that Racheyl had died, so friends and neighbors and family were gathered at Pat's house to lend support. Outside of the house, Steve Brinson was seated on the tailgate of a pickup truck with his dad. Now, he hadn't spoken to his dad in months prior to this day, according to witnesses. As one witness began to approach Steve and his dad sitting on the tailgate of that truck, he heard Steve say, "Dad, I really effed up this time." I'm Gavin Fish. Hope to see you in my next video. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you liked what you saw, please subscribe to my channel. And if you have any comments or questions, please leave them below.